Right, so welcome everybody. This is part of the Singularity Net Ambassador Programme, and it's from Onboarding Workgroup, and it's a Skillshare session, one of several that we've done. And the topic today is an introduction to budget planning and management. So I'm going to jump straight into it. Budget planning is one thing, and budget management is, of course, quite another thing, especially in this kind of ecosystem where, as we all know, token price fluctuation can undo all your plans at a stroke. But obviously they are related skills, so we're going to take them one at a time. I'm going to cover budget planning, and then I'm going to hand over to Duke to look at budget management. So first off, planning your budget. The first step really is collecting budget ideas. It's good to invite ideas for your budget items from all workgroup members if you can. Obviously, if you've got a low budget cap and you've got lots of essential work items that you can't really vary, there's not going to be much leeway for people's ideas. But where possible, it's good for budget planning to be decentralised and open within the workgroup. So it's good to invite your workgroup members to contribute. And there's various ways you can do that. You could share an actual budget spreadsheet with the essentials already in there and invite people to make suggestions either asynchronously, or you can literally use some meeting time to sit down and do it. You could have a smaller team or focus group who meet to create a draft that then people can comment on. You could do as R&D Guild do and have an application process for the projects part of your budget. Or you could have some kind of rolling Google Doc where people can add ideas for things that we might want to do as and when they occur to them. And then when budget time comes along, you go through them and go, okay, we should do this, we shouldn't do that. Next step probably is deciding on pay rates for different tasks. This is obviously always a matter of opinion, and it involves using your judgment. And in a decentralized community, it's absolutely fine if it varies a little bit from work group to work group. Say for example, in one work group, documentation might be undeniably a more difficult task, so you might want to pay more, or another work group might not do some things that other work groups do. For example, if you're running your meetings on a GitHub board, you don't need to pay somebody to write an agenda every meeting. So yeah, it is going to vary, and that's fine. But here are some ideas on how you might want to think about your pay rates. First of all, think about what price you would be prepared to do the task for. If you wouldn't do it for that much, why should anyone else? Secondly, you can check what other work groups pay for similar work. You don't have to copy them, obviously, but you can use their rates as a guide. And you can find other work groups' budgets in the budget planner, which I haven't put a link to because it's an internal document, but I can drop it in the chat later if anybody's not sure where to find it, but I'm sure everybody does know. Another guide rail is to remember that the ambassador program doesn't generally pay market rates. That's not what we ever set up to do. So it doesn't really help to go, oh, if I was doing this task in a professional environment, I'd get however many dollars. So yeah, you can't really think of it in those terms. But also within that context, I do think it's important to just add a little note about knowing your worth. It's kind of attested in lots of different contexts that women and other marginalised people may have a tendency to undervalue themselves compared to other people. So just be a bit conscious if you might be doing that when you're setting rates. Next step is creating your actual budget sheet. There's loads of ways to approach this, but we're going to show you just one way that we know is effective because it's been used in the ambassador program by several work groups and it seems to work all right. It involves dividing your budget into two sections. You can think of them as recurring costs and then one-off costs. Your recurring costs are obviously the regular routine things that you do every quarter regardless. In times of low token price, these are the things you're going to need to cut to the bone. Make sure it's just the essentials. One-off costs are more like project work. And they'll vary from quarter to quarter, so it might be a particular project that you're just doing that quarter. You can probably only do these at all if you've got leftover budget after costing out your essentials, which is why you need to cut these to the essentials. But of course, depending on your work group, the essentials might cover different things. For some groups, keeping the work group running and having meetings and documenting them and facilitating them and all that stuff, that is the main thing. But for other work groups, meetings might be less central, and it's asynchronous work on developing and building that is the real core stuff. Right, so either way, what I've given you here is a little bit on the spreadsheet formulae that you need to set it up. I'm not going to go through it. What I'm going to do is show you a sample spreadsheet in a minute, but it just means that if you've got a link to this presentation, you've also got a link to exactly how to set it all up. And for most of you probably already know totally fine how to use a spreadsheet, but if anyone doesn't, it just means they've got it there. Basically, what you're doing is you're creating those two sections, having a subtotal for each one, totaling your two subtotals, adding a cell for contingency if you want to use a contingency, and that'll give you a grand total. And then you're having an under/over cell, which is basically your workgroup's budget cap minus your total, so you can see how much you've got left. All right, so once you've done it all and you're down to making cuts, your cuts can be about the number of instances of something that you do, like how many meetings do you have in a quarter? Or it can be about the price per instance. So you might decide, yeah, we want to pay $30 or $25 or whatever for, I don't know, documentation or whatever it might be. Or you might decide to cut an entire budget line completely. You might say, look, realistically, we don't need that. Or you might move an entire budget item into the next quarter. This is probably only going to apply to your one-off costs because obviously the recurring costs are the same. They're there every quarter. Overall, though, you need to fit your wants to your budget cap. That means prioritizing. You've got to have an idea of what is your essentials. If you can't make your budget fit, remember that you can potentially take money from your workgroup reserves if you have any. Duke's going to say a lot more about the Treasury Guild dashboard in a minute, but I just thought I would show you really briefly. It's going to take a second to load, but this is onboarding workgroup on there. And you can see here, your cumulative remaining is basically your workgroup reserves. Obviously, it's higher at this point in the quarter because there's loads of stuff that has been funded which hasn't been, fund requests haven't been submitted for it yet. But that figure there is going to give you an idea of how much you've got left and how much you might be able to take from those reserves to fund things that you cannot cover. Note that it can be useful also to have a couple of things in your budget all costed out and ready, which you decide you will only do if token price goes up a bit during the quarter, especially at times like this when it looks very much like we'll all be putting our budgets in at a time with the token price being quite low. It's also maybe good to have an item or two that in your work group you've agreed will be the first thing to be cut if token price drops further. It's good to have those things agreed. You don't have to share it publicly, but if you know that within your work group, it's great. So let's try this whole process in practice. I'm going to open a demo sheet. All right, so first of all, your setup. You've got, as I said, your regular tasks and your one-off tasks. You will put your regular tasks in here and the reward like per instance, and then what the total is per quarter. And it will all add up to a subtotal here, which sums all those. Then you've got your one-off tasks. Similarly, you say what it is, what the reward is per instance, and what that will add up to per quarter, and subtotal it there. So it sums up those. Then your total adds your two subtotals, and the formula for that, you need a comma between the two cells. Then your takes your total, divides it by 100 and times it by whatever percentage of contingency you want. In this case, I've used 5%. Obviously, it's questionable when you've got a budget cap how useful a contingency budget even is, but it can be useful. Then you've got your grand total, which sums up your total and your contingency. And then you've got your under oversell. This is based on Onboarding Workgroup's budget for last quarter, where our total came to, at the exchange rate we were using, around 5,600. So that under over total is that amount minus your grand total. So that's how your sheet is set up. Let's have a look at regular tasks. I've used some of the regular tasks that we quite commonly have in onboarding as an example. So meeting facilitation, here we've got when we used to meet weekly, 13 weeks in a quarter, adds up to that. Documentation is a little bit more than facilitation, and again, 13 weeks in a quarter when we used to meet weekly. Managing Miro and D-work documentation, presenting town hall updates, writing a quarterly report, the core thing, which is the onboarding team, and the workgroup focus group who sort of work on strategic planning. Can anybody suggest other things that your work groups or other work groups that you know of do as regular tasks? I can see a few things in the chat. Has anybody got a suggestion for something that would be a regular task that a work group might do? Can anyone hear me at all?
Yes, I can hear you, Vanny.
Good, good. All right, any suggestions at all for a regular task that work groups sometimes do?
I mean, meetings.
Yeah, I mean, we've got that in already. Meeting facilitation, meeting documentation.
Oh, okay.
Anything else that anyone can think of? I mean, we don't do it, but I could say agenda prep. Let's say it was a tenner, that's going to be 130. If there's 13 in a quarter. Anything else?
What about task management?
Huh?
Tax management.
Sorry, I can't hear.
Okay, let me just put it down.
Okay. I mean, actually, what I can do is share the link to this spreadsheet and people can get in there and do it, add it yourselves. Let me put it in the chat. Task management. Yeah. What we're going to price that as? I mean, this is just imaginary, so. What would be your total for a quarter?
I think some work groups either do it weekly or bi-weekly, depending on the frequency of the times, the number of tasks they have. Maybe.
Okay. Yeah, that's probably true. All right. So let's leave that there. And what I'm going to do is copy those over to here. There we are. So our imaginary total for regular tasks is 3,580. And what I've done now is added in a few of the one-off tasks that we've done in onboarding at various times. Oh, look, this is something that it's always useful to check with your spreadsheet is, has your formula extended to any fields that you've added? So it should be down to there. There we go. So it's actually 3,810. Always check that. Right, so one-off tasks. At various times, onboarding has done things like buddy-style mentorship, skill-sharing sessions like this one, conducting a research project, creating async onboarding resources like videos and infographics. And here's an example of what I mentioned earlier, the idea of an item you'd like to do where you'd specify the cost, you'd cost it out, but you'd actually put it in as 0 and say you'll only do it if the token price rises sufficiently to cover it. Has anyone got any other suggestions for one-off project-based tasks that different work groups do, and we can add them into this pretend budget? Or if you want to follow the link and do it yourself, please do.
Research can fly.
Research. Yeah, we've actually got conducting a research project. So we've got that. Look,
Yeah, I don't know if my connection is quite good, but can you guys hear me?
what? I can hear you, yeah.
All right. So I'm not really suggesting, but such as you did with row 19, we could also do something with, let's just say a project, and we could also say we could fund that from reserves, basically. Then the allocate, something like that.
Yeah, we could, absolutely. Yeah.
So
I mean, when you're putting in your budget, you know, you've got your under over. At the moment, we're $448 over. So we could just add a note to say that 448 will be covered from reserves, so that it's really clear. So that when people look at it, they would be able to see how we're funding it. I mean, I think actually if I was doing it, I might take the item that was over and put it underneath. But it's up to you how you lay out your sheet. All right, so we haven't got any more suggestions for other one-off tasks, but we are 400 quid over. As you say, we could fund that from our reserves, or we could have an item here which we're only going to fund if we have more money. But can you see anything that we could cut? Just looking at this. Can anybody make a suggestion? If this was your work group, what would you cut?
I'll probably cut out tax management, but it kind of looks like the same thing as managing Miro and the work documentation.
True. Yeah, that is true. All right, so we can lose that. Any other suggestions? I mean, for me, this is a thing. I don't know. Go on. Oh, there's something in chat.
Okay.
Wait a minute. Reduce the number of Skillshare sessions. Yeah, that's pretty cool. So we've got 2 sessions. So if we only had 1, that would be... What would it be? 125. Yep. Anything else? I mean, for those who are in onboarding work group, there is a big change that we've made, and it's to do with this. We don't meet weekly anymore. What we've done is reduced it to, well, I guess it's 6 meetings in the quarter. So that would be 150. And that would be 6 weeks in the quarter. There is 180. So, oh God, why hasn't that? So that makes a really big chunky reduction, and we're still getting fortnightly meetings, but we've now got nearly $200 in hand. So that's quite a dramatic thing. Yeah, we also took out agenda prep. This is absolutely true, because we're now on a GitHub board, so that can go. Right, so now we are plenty in budget. So that just gives you an example of the sort of things you might need to look at, and how this little field here of under over is really handy because it tells you how much you've got to play with. All right, let's get back to the slides. So yeah, it is all about this question of what is essential. As we've seen, this approach of splitting it into two helps you think about what is and isn't essential, but you've got to be prepared to think outside the box a little bit. Are your essentials really essential? For example, if you're having weekly meetings, do you actually need to? As we've just said, if you're paying someone to create agendas every week, could you move to a GitHub board? Can you minimize the number of people assigned to a task? One thing that I think we do in times of more money is assign several people to a task, often with an idea of mentorship, you know, somebody who knows what they're doing and somebody who's shadowing them. But some tasks don't need that many people to execute. Are there core tasks that tend to get done twice in your work group because they were not done well the first time? If so, maybe you need to think about only giving those tasks to people who actually know how. But obviously that raises a question. How are you going to do? Just something to think about. Or alternatively, do you need to budget for training or mentorship? It might cost a little bit initially, but in the long run, you'll have more skilled people and more choice on who to assign things to. So this all ultimately relates to the idea of minimum budgets, which, as those of you who go to governance work group are aware, this is something that we have been talking about. Defining the absolute least that a work group needs in order to operate and ensuring that it's covered even in times when token price is really low. Also, just quickly, don't forget collaborations. If you've got something to do in board, it might be time for a collaboration with another work group. You've all obviously how and when you should approach that other work group who might want to collaborate with you. Don't do it 2 days before the budgets need to go in. It's, you know, it's going to be a headache for everybody. And also think about what do you need to agree about who will put in what amount of money and who will be responsible for what. You've got to get that clear for a good collaboration that's not going to cause headaches. But finally, this all raises questions for us as a programme in terms of what our priorities really are. Budgeting, you know, money is the heart of everything quite often. So what we prioritise financially tells us who we are, I think. Would we rather prioritise keeping a work group running, so meetings, facilitation, documentation, all those tasks, or would we rather prioritise more asynchronous project-type work, like building, creating, researching, the kind of one-off project stuff? Should we pay people who already know what they're doing, or should we pay for mentorship and skill sharing? Would we rather spend our scarce resources on routine stuff, or on the kind of more exciting, ambitious experiments? Obviously, all these issues have been discussed many times, and no doubt will be discussed again. And of course, it'll vary from work group to work group what you prioritise. But for now, let's move on and let's look at budget management. So it's over to you, Duke.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Awesome presentation by Vani. Thank you. And I think that has given a great head start to what I will be talking about, which is budget management. Okay, please confirm you can see my screen and you can also hear me.
Yep, I can see you and hear you.
Okay. Yeah, let me drop the link to this in the chat. So, yeah, so left the link in the chat. Okay, welcome again. Okay, can you see my screen here? I'm not sure what you're seeing. My screen looks a bit messed up, but...
Yeah, I don't think you're in presenter mode because we can see like, but it's fine. It's fine.
I'm meant to be in. Okay. You can see my full screen now, I suppose.
That's it. Yeah.
Cool. So once again, welcome. We will be talking about budget management, where we would consider effective strategies for tracking, controlling, and adjusting budgets. First, a quick definition of terms. So what does budget management mean? As you can clearly see on the screen, it refers to the process of monitoring, controlling, and adjusting a work group's budgets to ensure that it stays within financial limits. As we all know, in the SNET Ambassador Program, we do have a budget system that accounts for expenses that would be incurred across an entire quarter. So this subject is essential because it helps us stay within the provisions of that. We do know how uncertain things can be. And so when we talk about budget management, we do have to get to the point of discussing how do we track the expenses that would happen, especially with the uncertainty that exists, the fluctuations in token prices. And of course, we have two basic tools that we can use to achieve this. The first is DWork. All right. Almost everybody knows about DWork. I think everybody knows about DWork. And then we also have the Treasury dashboard. This is where it gets a bit tricky sometimes because very few people, I think, know about the dashboard. And for some who do even know about the dashboard, very few people know how to operate it, right? And it's a very simplistic process, navigating DWork and the Treasury dashboard, and one thing that helps us, or that would help us as budget creators, either currently or in the future, track what we do, is that we would have to first and foremost submit completed works to DWork immediately, and keep an eye frequently on token prices. But a quick introduction into how to use the Treasury dashboard, right? The dashboard is your best friend when managing a budget. First, you'll have to look at the detail of the particular wallet you want to manage, if I'll call it that, right? Because once you open the dashboard, it's going to give you almost an account of every work group's detail, or every work group's budget and all that. And then you have to filter, of course. Sorry, this is sounding very theoretical. We're going to go into the practical in just a minute. And then from there, after searching for the work group and the particular quarter that you're intending to, or you want to focus on, from there you would see how much that work group has left and how much has been spent in the quarter, and of course the peculiarities of the token fluctuation, right? So quickly, let's do a bit of a practical and look at the Treasury dashboard so it doesn't sound like French. Okay, can you see my Treasury dashboard now, or are you still seeing my Canva?
Still seeing Canva.
Okay. Okay, you should see my Treasury dashboard now. Please confirm.
Yep.
Okay, so like I mentioned, once you open the Treasury of everything in all of the work groups, right? So you want to come here where you have select work groups, right? It's showing details of every work group because all work groups have been selected. So let's say, for example, we want to see what's happening in the onboarding work group, right? We just have to look for onboarding work group in this mix and pick onboarding work group, right? You see that it now it reduces the scope, right? It shows you only what is available in the onboarding work group. You can see the budget across quarters. You can see what has been spent. You can see the incoming reallocation, outgoing reallocation, what is remaining, the cumulative reallocation, and of course the cumulative remaining. But this is for every single month, right? And every single quarter since the inception of the onboarding work group. Right, so we're in quarter 1 of 2025. So you want to come to this first column here and pick quarter 1 of 2025. And of course, if you want to look at the entire quarter, or you want to look at the specific month, you can do that from the next box here, right? And so you see that from here, it gives a readjusted costing, you can see you have just 8,500, which is what was allocated to the onboarding work group. And you can see the cumulative remains here, which includes reserves and what have you. All right, you have graphs here that show what has happened and, you know, payments that have gone out, you know, and the contribute have been paid. And of course, you can see their names, but if you hover on them, you can see the extension of their wallet addresses, right? Okay, and then here we have all the tasks that have been paid for, right? So if you feel that, oh, you had done a task at a particular time and that task was not paid for, and then you raise a complaint either to anyone in the work group or to in Treasury, what is simply going to be done is that this Treasury dashboard is going to be opened, and from here we can investigate to know what task was paid for and if it was paid to the right wallet, right? It's a very simplistic process. You can do this for any work group. Let's do a try. And of course you can also have multiple, you can do that for multiple work groups, right? Now you see that because I clicked on African Guild, it selected both African Guild and onboarding work group. Now, if I want to focus on the African Guild, all I have to do is unclick the onboarding work group, and it's going to, you know, centralize its focus only on the African Guild. You can do the same thing for any work group and any month, you know, and you're going to have as much detail as you would need. This comes in really handy so that you know how much you have left. For example, in the African Guild, all we have left is 4,662 AGIX. Now, it would not make sense, right, that we fund any project that exceeds this amount, right? And so we would have to be very diligent in our operations so we do not exceed this, right? You find out that at the end of the quarter, some work groups are in deficits because they have exceeded, you know, their budgets for the quarter. So it's as simple as that. Of course, we're going to have time for questions. So if you feel the need to ask any question, please feel free to, we'll create that section and you can always ask a question, right? And yeah, I mentioned that some work groups spend all their budgets while others keep reserve for security. Yeah, well, there's an ethical concern around that, and a question that's, which way is best? We'll find out soon. On to managing token price fluctuation. As we all know, Singularity uses AGIX, and I want to think since the breach or since the merger, you know, there has been, it has become more volatile than, you know, some of us met it. You know, for those who have been in the ecosystem for longer, you know, you probably would not be surprised at the drop in token prices. But for those who came in, you know, at some point when token prices went up to $1, you'd be surprised, right? So how do we manage token price fluctuation, right? Concerns have been raised about pricing tasking AGIX, so that way it's easier to just pay, and then we can always know, we don't have to go back and readjust budgets to fit fluctuations and all of that, right? But the problem with pricing tasking AGIX is that it shifts the risks to the individuals, right? And takes, you know, absolves the work group or the program from any form of risk, right? And well, it's just an ethical concern, you know, why that should be. So at this moment, I don't think any work group or any guild pays in AGIX. Everyone does their costs in USD, you know, so that the individual can now be absolved from the risk, and the risk is instead taken by the work group or the program, as the case may be, you know. So that, although a subject, you know, in consideration, well, I wouldn't really say consideration, just a subject that had been brought up at one point, you know, it hasn't really been implemented, and we are not using that, so to say, right? However, the more practical, you know, solution, or the more practical approach is mid-quarter adjustment, where you get to check token prices midway in the quarter and adjust planned expenses if or where necessary, right? Yeah, that's a more practical approach to it. And of course, we also have the emergency fund, where it is advisable that work groups and guilds have a reserve to handle sudden token devaluation, which is catered for in as contingency. But oftentimes, I mean, most work groups get to use up the entire contingency and all that. So, yep. Another way we can manage our budgets could be through payment scheduling, right? And there are different approaches to this. First, is to decide on a payment frequency that works for your work group. Before now, we used to have the weekly payments, but now Treasury has moved payments to bi-weekly, so we no longer have weekly payment. You can also decide if you want to pay monthly or quarterly, and it just helps you, somehow prospect, for better days, just in case the token prices will recover. Of course, we all know it's a two-way street. It can recover, and then there may be some times where it wouldn't recover, right? But that's just an approach. You can decide on a payment frequency. You can also avoid accumulating too many pending payments as it can create financial strain. I'll give you a classic example of this because in the African Guild, in our Q4, we did accumulate a lot of pending payments, and it impacted on existing payments. And something we did that probably other people may also consider doing is that we now had to, in retrospect, although we know that every task has a promised reward, right? But in retrospect, we had to speak to the leaders of, I don't know if the word leader is the right word, but members of the core team, and convince members of the core team to forego some parts of their allocation, which they were willing to do so that we could recover some more money and have more to distribute, right? So for example, someone who was meant to be paid $100 USD was willing to forego a fraction of that, could be 20, could be 30, and then we now could use that to pay other people. So we had more money in circulation in Q1 because, some people were willing to forego some part of their benefits, for Q4, But the lesson we have learned from that is to avoid accumulating too many pending payments so it doesn't create a financial strain. You can also ensure transparency in payments, by recording all transactions, right? And this simply speaks to an offline recording, right? Of course, every transaction is recorded on DWork and is recorded on the Treasury dashboard, but oftentimes work group leads could lose track of what they have done, so sometimes it helps to record on a note or something, that you have this and you have this. I mean, for some of us who think better on paper, it could help remind you that, oh, okay, this is just what you have left and you shouldn't exceed, this. Right. And other methods that we can employ when token prices drop or we have unexpected expenses is, to postpone non-essential expenses to the next quarter. Right. I know that oftentimes we can have this sense of pressure to want to do things right here and right now, but as Vani was speaking, she was able to separate her budget planning slides or approach to two sections, right? The essential and the non-essential. We wouldn't really say they are non-essential, but I believe you all understand what we mean, right? What's the recurrent thing? What does this work group need to survive right now, right? And of course, what can we do without in the meantime, right? It may still be essential, but it's not a do or die affair if we don't do that, right? And so we can push that to the next quarter, right? We can also reduce the scope of projects instead of cutting essential work, right? So if we said we're going to do 5 things, right, but from the look of things, we no longer would have the budget to do that, we can decide instead of doing 5 things, we would rather do 2 things or do just 1 thing, right? And we can also identify and cut inefficiencies, like most work groups are currently doing with the bi-weekly meetings. seeing that meetings are paid for, and of course in the onboarding work group, we're no longer paying for preparation of meeting agenda. That's also a way of cutting costs. It's not an unnecessary item, but it's just a way of cutting costs and having more resources to be distributed for more essential tasks. That also includes duplicated tasks, right? And of course, we can also discuss this in a workgroup sync call. And finally, we can follow the process for budget change. Let's just take a quick look at that. I don't think there is an agreed process yet. It's still in the process of ratification. However, there are suggestions for this process, and it's in the meeting summary notes for one of the meetings in January. Right, and I think the suggestion is that if the change budget line is 0 to 5% of the work group's total quarterly budget, the work group can change this at their own discretion without any consultation, right? And if it's 5 to 35% of the total quarterly budget, the work group should submit the suggested change to decisions to be made Discord channel. And that more detail, I can leave the link to this in the chat, so anyone who wants to take a look can of course proceed to taking a look. There is a form that is still being filled. For those of us who haven't, I'll also leave a link to that, so that we can ratify what the process for budget change will look like. But yeah, that's in the works, and in a sec. And of course, one other item that we can take into consideration for managing budgets would be collaboration, right? If your work group lacks funds for a crucial project, and I forgot to underline the word crucial, it just has to be something that's really crucial. If your work group lacks funds for that, then you can consider partnering with another work group to share the costs and responsibilities. Now, we did this in Q4 of last year, when we had the Ubuntu and AI in-person event. That was co-funded, by the African Guild and the AI Ethics work group, right? I want to think that probably that was the first ever cross-guild collaboration. I don't know of anyone, so pardon me if my records are wrong, but yeah, it showed that guilds could come together, put resources together to get something done, something that could be both beneficial to both guilds, right? So yeah, we did that, and more work groups and guilds are also encouraged to do that. So you don't have to probably feel stranded if you find that a crucial work you want to get done, probably has an angle of benefits or has, an intersection with another work group. You can present that to that other work group. And of course, if they have reserves and they are graceful enough, they can decide that this is something that they also want to, a responsibility that they also want to shoulder. And you may not have to extend yourself so much, right? So yeah, of course, you can also crowdsource, or write grant applications within the DAO or within the SingularityNet ecosystem. As we all know, the SingularityNet ecosystem is broad. There are many spin-offs that offer multiple funding for projects. We do have a deep funding. We do have, of course, there's BGI. There's the funding round of BGI coming up. The only tricky thing with this approach is that oftentimes projects are being applied for as individuals, so applying for a grant, for example, as a guild could come up a bit tricky. But yeah, that's another approach to it. So yeah, just a quick recap of what I have said so far about budget management. In summary, just plan with flexibility, always account for unexpected changes, track spending diligently by using the Treasury dashboard, adapt to market conditions and be prepared to adjust. Nothing is cast in stone. Like I mentioned, you can always work with the guild to make modifications, even though there had been already agreed items to be paid for. And finally, prioritize transparency and collaboration by engaging work group members in budgeting decisions. This is the time to ask questions if you have any, also noting that we are also pressed for time. But yeah, thanks for giving me your ears. And if you have any questions, we'll be delighted to take it right now. Thank you very much.